the reading of my father's will, my cousin stood up before the lawyer had finished the first page and said, "Stop. Before you go any further, everyone needs to know that I'm not Uncle Daniel's niece. I'm his daughter. He had an affair with my mother 34 years ago, and he knew, and he hid it my whole life. I'm entitled to a child's share." 40 relatives inhaled at once. My aunt started crying. And I sat there, 20 minutes into being an orphan, and understood that she had chosen the one lie our family could not immediately disprove, because parts of it were true. Let me back up. Because to understand how a woman weaponized a real family secret to steal a third of my father's estate, you have to understand what my father actually did 34 years ago, and why the truth was almost close enough to her lie to make it work. My name is Helena Marchetti. I'm 36 years old, and when my father died, my cousin Seraphine claimed to be his secret daughter. She was lying. She was lying about something real, and that combination, a lie built on the load-bearing wall of an actual secret, nearly took a third of my father's estate, and worse, nearly rewrote him permanently in the memory of everyone who loved him. Let me tell you about my father. Daniel Marchetti was a decent man. Not a saint. I'm not going to sell you a saint, and the fact that he wasn't one is the whole hinge of this story. He was a contractor. He built things with his hands. He was funny and stubborn, and he loved my mother for 41 years, and he raised me and my brother in a house he built himself. He was, in the ordinary way of ordinary good men, a person who mostly did right and occasionally didn't. And here's the real secret, the true one, the one my cousin found and sharpened into a knife. 34 years ago, my parents separated. Briefly, about 8 months. During a bad stretch, I only learned the details of much later. And during that separation, my father had a relationship with a woman. It was not an affair, technically. He and my mother were separated, living apart, genuinely uncertain whether they'd reconcile. But it happened, and it was real, and when my parents did reconcile, my father ended it and never spoke of it again. And that relationship produced a child. That's true. That's the actual, verified, real thing. Somewhere out in the world, I have a half-sister. My father knew, he found out when she was small, and here's the part that matters and the part that took me a year to make peace with. He did the wrong thing. He didn't tell my mother. He didn't tell us. He sent money, quietly, for 18 years, out of an account nobody looked at, and he kept the whole thing in a box, and he never once found the courage to say it out loud to his family. That was my father's real failure. Not the child, the silence. He let a daughter grow up as a secret, because he was a coward about one conversation, and I've had to hold that alongside every good thing he ever did for me. So when my cousin Seraphina stood up at the will reading and said, "I'm his secret daughter," she was standing on something true. A secret daughter existed. My father had hidden her. Some of the older relatives had heard whispers over the years. The separation was known. The rumor of a child had circulated in the vague way family rumors do. Seraphina hadn't invented the idea out of nothing. She'd found the family's one genuine unresolved thing and stepped into it. She just wasn't the daughter. That was the only false part, and it was, for about a year, almost impossible to prove. Let me tell you about Seraphina. She's my cousin, my mother's sister's daughter, which is exactly the detail that should have made her claim absurd and somehow didn't, because family trees confuse people, and because a good liar counts on nobody drawing the diagram. She was raised in our family. She was at my birthdays. And she has always been in trouble, money trouble mostly, of the perpetual kind, the sort of person whose crises are a weather system. And she's very, very good at being believed. She cries beautifully. She has a talent, a real one, for telling you a story where she is the wounded party, and making you feel that doubting her would be a cruelty you'd have to live with. My father died of a stroke at 68. And 20 minutes into the reading of his will, my cousin claimed his estate had a third heir, and that heir was her. Let me tell you what she actually claimed, because the construction was clever. Her story, that during the separation 34 years ago, my father had a relationship, true, and that the resulting child was asterisk her, that her mother, my aunt, my mother's own sister, had passed her off as her husband's, and that my father had known and paid and hidden it. And that she'd only recently learned the truth from documents she'd found after her own mother's death 2 years earlier. Her mother was conveniently dead. Her legal father was conveniently dead. Everyone who could have flatly contradicted her was gone. And it had teeth because the separation was real. The relationship was real. The hidden child was real, and half the family had heard the rumor. The secret payments were real, and Seraphina, this was her masterstroke, had somehow learned of their existence. She could say, "He sent money in secret for years. Ask anyone, look at his accounts." And it would be true, and it would seem to corroborate her. She'd found a story that was 90% verifiable and swapped out the one variable nobody had ever known. Let me tell you what it did to my family. It detonated, instantly, because my father wasn't there to answer, and the parts that could be checked all checked out. Within a week, the family had split into 2 camps, and I want to be honest that the larger camp believed her. Let me explain why, because they were stupid, isn't the answer, and it would be comfortable to pretend it was. They believed her because the story was mostly true. That's the whole thing. If Seraphina had invented a secret from nothing, she'd have been laughed out of the room. Instead, she said, there was a separation. True, the older relatives remembered it. There was another woman. True. There was a child. True, or at least widely rumored for 3 decades. He sent money in secret for years. Devastatingly true, and she said it with such confidence that when my own uncle checked and found that yes, there had been an account nobody knew about, that single confirmation did more damage than everything else combined. Because now she wasn't a woman making a claim. She was a woman who'd asterisk known something we didn't, and been proven right. That's the architecture. She let the family verify 4 true things, and by the time anyone got to the 5th, the only false one, the only one that mattered. They'd already decided she was credible. Verification is contagious. Get someone to confirm you about the small things and they'll extend you the large one for free. And she had a second weapon, which was her own wounded dignity. Every time anyone asked her to prove it, she performed devastation. You think I'd make this up? But my own mother, do you know what it's been like carrying this? And the family, which had spent 30 years watching Serafina be in trouble and feeling vaguely guilty about her, finally had a way to make it up to her. Believing her was a kindness. Doubting her was cruelty. She'd made her claim into a loyalty test. Let me tell you about the specific afternoon it stopped being an argument and became a war. 6 weeks in, my aunt, Serafina's mother's other sister, so my aunt on that side, came to my mother's house. Not to Serafina's mother's house, to my mother's, 2 months after my father died. And she sat in my mother's living room, drinking my mother's coffee, and said, in the voice people use when they've come to deliver a kindness, "Rosa, I think you have to accept it, for everyone's sake." The girl's not lying. You can see it in her, and Daniel did have that account. We all know it now. Fighting it is just going to drag Daniel's name through the mud for another year. And then she said the sentence I will be angry about until I die. She said, and honestly, Rosa, men do these things. It was 34 years ago. Let it go. Give her a share. Let us all be a family again. Let us all be a family again, as if my mother were the one dividing it. 2 months a widow, and she was being asked to buy peace by publicly conceding that her husband had fathered a child with her own sister, a thing that never happened because the alternative was being difficult asterisk. My mother didn't say anything. She just got up and took the coffee cups to the sink and stood there with her back to the room. I watched my mother's shoulders, and I understood that she was 71 years old, and she had been married for 41 years, and this was going to be the last chapter of her life if we let it be. That was the afternoon I stopped being sad and started being useful. Because here's what Serafina had actually done, and it took me weeks to name it. She hadn't just made a claim on the estate. She'd made a claim on my father. He'd been dead 6 weeks, and she'd already begun rewriting who he was, in the memory of every person who'd loved him. And the terrible efficiency of it was that he'd handed her the raw material himself, with his 34 years of silence. Man who keeps a secret is a man who can be described by anyone who finds it. My father, by never telling the truth, had left his own reputation as an unguarded house, and my cousin simply walked in and started rearranging the furniture. And the will contest was real. Serafina hired a lawyer and filed, claiming a child's share, a third of my father's estate, which was not enormous but was everything my parents had built over 41 years, including the house he'd made with his own hands. My mother, this is the part I can barely talk about. My mother had to sit in that kitchen, 11 days after burying her husband of 41 years, and be told by her own sister's daughter that Daniel had fathered a child with her sister. Not the true story. A worse one, an uglier one, an incestuous feeling betrayal that made the man she'd loved for 4 decades into something monstrous. My mother's grief was taken away from her and replaced with humiliation. Let me tell you about the midpoint, because it's the reason this story is about something more than money. I nearly settled. About 7 months in, exhausted, watching my mother deteriorate, watching my father's name become a punchline at family gatherings, my lawyer put an option in front of me. Serafina had signaled she'd take a smaller sum to go away. Not a third, considerably less. Quick, quiet over. And I wanted to take it so badly I could taste it. Not because I doubted. Because of my mother. Because every month this continued, my mother had to keep living inside a story where her husband had betrayed her with her own sister. And I thought, I can buy her out of this. I can pay this woman and my mother can stop. I got as far as telling my lawyer to open the conversation. And then my father's oldest friend called me. His name is Salvador Greco, Sal, and he'd known my father since they were 19, and he'd been the only person on earth my father ever told about the real secret. Sal said, "Helena, I hear you're thinking of paying her." I said yes. And Sal said something that reorganized everything. If you pay her, you make it true. Forever. In 50 years, when nobody alive remembers your father, the only fact anyone will know about him is that he paid off the daughter he had with his wife's sister. That's what your money buys, not peace. A permanent lie carved into a dead man who can't say a word about it. He was quiet a moment. And Helena, there's a real girl out there. A real one, your father's actual daughter. Whoever she is, she's watching a stranger wear her life. If you pay Serafina, you don't just lie about your father. You erase your own sister to do it. I hadn't thought about that, not once in 7 months. There was a real person out there who was actually my father's child, and Serafina's fraud wasn't just stealing money. It was stealing asterisk her asterisk. If Serafina's claim stood, the real daughter's existence would be permanently occupied by an imposter. My father's actual failure, the daughter he'd hidden out of cowardice, would be papered over with a lie, and the real woman would never be found, because everyone would think she'd already been. I called my lawyer back and told him no. And then I did the 2 things I should have done in month 1. Let me tell you about the DNA, because everyone's asking, and because the answer is more complicated than television suggests. Yes, the obvious move is a DNA test. And Serafina brilliantly had spent 7 months not taking one. She had reasons, endless reasons. She was traumatized. It was insulting that we demand it. She'd do it when the family stops treating her like a criminal. She'd start the process and then a delay, then another. And her reluctance played, to the family, as wounded dignity. Of course, she doesn't want to be swabbed like a suspect. Look what you people are putting her through. Let me tell you about the Sunday that crystallized it, because it's the best illustration of what we were actually fighting. There was a family lunch, one of the last ones that included both camps, and someone raised the test. Gently. Cousin, trying to be helpful, said, "Sira, wouldn't it just end all this? One swab and everyone has to shut up." And Seraphina put down her fork and looked at the table with her eyes shining and said, "So that's where we are. My uncle is dead. My mother's dead. I found out at 34 that my whole life was a lie, and I came to my family, my asterisk family, hoping for one person to just believe me, and instead I'm being asked to submit evidence, like a criminal. You know what it's like to be told that the word of a woman in this family means nothing without a laboratory." And she cried, and she was magnificent, and my aunt put an arm around her, and the cousin who'd asked apologized, for suggesting a test that would take 4 minutes. And I sat there and watched it and understood the trick completely. She had made asking for proof into an act of cruelty. She built a room where the only respectful thing to do was believe her without evidence, and where anyone who wanted evidence was a bully persecuting a grieving woman. It's the same architecture liars have used forever, and it works especially well on decent people, because decent people would rather be wrong than be cruel. I said quietly, "Sierra, I'll take one too. Same day, same lab, we'll both do it. That way nobody's a suspect, it's just two women getting a fact." And the room went very still, because it was such an obviously reasonable thing to say, and because everyone watched her have to respond to it. And she said, "I'm not going to be managed by you, Helena," and got up from the table. That was the moment my aunt's face changed. Not much, but I saw it. Because a woman who is telling the truth about her own father takes the test. A woman who has spent 7 months producing reasons is producing reasons. But a will contest is not a family argument. It's a legal proceeding. And in a legal proceeding, a person claiming to be a decedent's biological child, seeking a child's share on that basis, cannot indefinitely refuse to establish the one fact her entire claim rests on. My lawyer had told me this in month 2. I hadn't pushed because I was drowning, and because pushing felt aggressive, and because I kept hoping it would resolve some kind of way. It wouldn't, so we pushed. Formally, through the court, and the court did what courts do. It said, in effect, "You're claiming a biological relationship is the sole basis for a claim on this estate. Establish it." And Seraphina had nowhere left to go. All 7 months of wounded dignity had been a performance for an audience of relatives, and a court is not an audience. A court doesn't care that asking feels cruel. That's the entire reason courts exist. They are the room where the story has to be true. Let me tell you about the second thing, which is the one that actually broke my heart open. My father kept a box. Sal told me where. In the workshop, behind the plain blades, in a coffee tin, the most Daniel Marchetti hiding place imaginable. And in it was 34 years of my father's cowardice and my father's love, tangled together the way real things are. Bank records, 18 years of quiet payments dated to an account. Handful of photographs of a girl I'd never seen at different ages, sent by a woman he'd once known, that he'd clearly looked at often. And a letter never sent, obviously written many times over years, the paper soft from handling. It said, "To my daughter, whose name I'm not going to write, because if this is ever found, I've decided how it gets found. I've been a coward for your whole life. I told myself the money was enough. It wasn't. I told myself telling the truth would destroy my wife and my children, and that protecting them was the honorable thing. But that's the lie cowards tell. I was protecting myself. You deserved a father who claimed you. Instead, you got a bank transfer. If you ever read this, know that I knew about you every single day, and thought about you every single day, and that the failure is entirely mine and has nothing to do with anything you are. D." With it in the tin was a folded sheet in my father's handwriting with a name, a date of birth, and a last known city. He'd left the map. He'd been too much of a coward to say it while alive, and just brave enough to make sure it could be found. The name was not Seraphina. The date of birth was 14 months off from Seraphina's. The city was a place my aunt has never lived in her life. Let me tell you about the reckoning. It happened in a lawyer's conference room, not a dinner table, and it was better that way. The court had ordered the testing. Seraphina had run out of delays. And her results came back exactly as they had to. She's my cousin. Full stop. My aunt's daughter, my mother's sister's child, precisely what she'd been her entire life. Not my father's daughter, not any part of it. And I had the tin. I laid the bank records out. Everyone believed her because she said he paid in secret for years, and he did. Here are the payments. 18 years of them, and they don't go anywhere near her mother. I laid out the photographs. And here's the girl he was paying for. And finally, my father's letter, and the folded sheet with the name and the birth date and the city. My father did do the thing you all half suspected, I said. He had a daughter during the separation, and he hid her for 34 years because he was a coward, and that's the truth, and I'm not going to defend it. He was wrong. He failed her badly her entire life. I looked at my cousin, but she isn't you. She was born 14 months before you, in a city your mother has never set foot in. You heard the family rumor. You knew the payments were real. And you looked at my father's actual failure, the daughter he was too weak to claim, and you decide you could stand in her place and take a third of his estate because the only person who could contradict you was dead. Seraphina cried. She was very good, right to the end. You didn't just try to rob his estate, I said. You tried to occupy his real daughter. If you'd won, she'd have been erased. The family would have thought the secret was solved, and no one would ever have looked for her again. You'd have taken her father, her existence, and her money all at once, and she'd never even have known you did it. Here is how it ended. Her claim collapsed the moment the testing came back. There was nothing left of it. She withdrew. The estate was preserved, and there were consequences. Knowingly asserting a false claim against an estate is not a free action, and my lawyer pursued what could be pursued. Seraphina has been gone from our family since. Her own mother's memory is diminished by what she did with it, which is its own bleak justice. And then I did the thing that actually mattered. I looked for my sister. I had a name, a birth date, a city, and a father's letter that was addressed to her. It took 4 months. Her name is Beatrice. She's 37, 14 months older than me, exactly as the paper said. She's a nurse. She lives 6 hours away. She had known for most of her life who her father was, and she had never contacted us because, and this is the thing that undid me, she assumed we knew and had decided she wasn't wanted. I want to describe our first phone call for exactly as long as it deserves, which is not long because it's mine. I'll say only this: I told her I'd found a letter, and I read it to her. And a 37-year-old woman I'd never met heard, for the first time in her life, our father say I knew about you every single day, and the failure is entirely mine and has nothing to do with anything you are. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, he kept my pictures, and I said yes. In a coffee tin behind the plain blades where he could see them. We're sisters now, actually, properly. It's been 3 years. It's not simple. She has a mother who has feelings about my mother, and I have a mother who had to learn that the true story, while less lurid than Seraphina's, is still that her husband hid a child for 34 years. My mother took a long time with it. What finally moved her was meeting Beatrice, who looks like my father around the eyes, in a way that is frankly unfair. Who was so obviously not the villain of anything, just a woman who'd spent her life assuming she was unwanted by people who didn't know she existed. My mother has forgiven my father mostly. She said something once that I think about constantly. I'm angrier about the 34 years of silence than I am about the 8 months. He didn't cheat on me. He just didn't trust me with the truth. That's the part that took something. My father was not a saint. He was a coward about the largest thing in his life, and a daughter grew up thinking she was unwanted because of it, and no amount of money in a coffee tin fixes that. But when my cousin tried to steal his estate by stepping into the space where his real daughter should have been, she made one miscalculation. She assumed a coward leaves nothing behind. He left everything behind. He left the payments, and the photographs, and a letter he wrote 100 times and never sent, and a folded piece of paper with a name and a birth date and a city on it, hidden where his oldest friend would know to look. He was too weak to say it out loud while he was alive, but he made absolutely certain that, when he was gone, the truth would be findable by anyone who cared enough to look. Seraphina counted on the dead being silent. She didn't know my father had spent 34 years leaving himself a way to finally speak, and that when he finally did, from a coffee tin behind the plain blades, the first thing he'd say was his real daughter's name. Not hers. Never hers. Beatrice. Her name was always Beatrice, and he'd written it down and kept it and waited for somebody to come and find her. I found her. It's the only thing my father ever asked me to do, and he never even asked. He just left the map and hoped.